right now when I'm not podcasting, I want to go ahead and follow up on a story that I actually reported on the Broadcasters podcast. BTS topping the Billboard charts last week with the number one song, Butter. And that was the result of the song garnering 242,000 copies of the single being sold. So here's what comes up from Forbes. Now, we already know there's some things going on when it comes to how the charts are calculated. And the one thing that will happen is if sales are brought up at such a high rate, but rarely do you have any albums that really push out, or not albums, but singles that will push out a whole lot of sales. But with BTS, they know that's one way they can get the song up to the charts because of how important sales are. So anyway, a story coming up from Forbes. Brian Rowley, who writes for the music industry, says that BTS aren't ruining the Billboard charts that were already broken. So let's break into what happened here. Now, I already mentioned they were number one song, and it was their fourth number one hit in a row behind Dynamite. Then they had help to get Savage Love up in the charts because they had a remix of the song, and Life Goes On. So they have 4 number one singles faster than any group since the Jackson 5 in 1970, which the charts were done in a much different way. Now, there's a story from Stereo Gum that published an article saying that BTS and their fan army are rendering the pop charts useless. And this is written by Tom Brehan. And Brehan writes a weekly column about every song that hit number one on the Billboard Hot 100. He argues that because Butter sorted number one, based largely off the strength of the 69-cent digital downloads, plus an instrumental version that was independently available for download and also counts towards the chart's placement, trailed several new Olivia Rodrigo songs on streaming services and fell short of Silk Sonic's Leave the Door Open, which was also number one, which was highest airplayed at radio. Its success is somehow inorganic. He claims that Butter is not, in fact, the most popular song in America right now, and if you look at the charts, you're going to get a completely distorted idea of how popular BTS actually are. And he goes along and says that there are other artists who have charted number one hits via unscrupulous measures. Travis Scott, 6ix9ine, Taylor Swift, talking about bundles. Up until last year, Billboard counted music sold through merchandise and ticket bundles toward its song and music and album charts, which the aforementioned artists, along with Lady Gaga, Kenny Chesney, Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, The Weeknd, and many more, milked to the fullest extent. Now, The Weeknd's enormous after-hours debut was assisted by more than 80 different merchandise bundles. Then Billboard stopped counting them towards its charts last July, ceasing to allow physical music bundled with digital downloads to be reported as digital sales. So artists must ship physical products before they can be counted towards the charts. And then Brehan also talks about how, when the song gets to debut at number one on the Hot 100, it plummets several dozen spots down the next week, quickly vanishes from the charts when they're no longer being propped up by branded sweatpants, lollipops, and condoms. It's like a broken system. But it's only BTS that really does it. I mean, there's other artists that do it because they have their record labels that can get behind it. But then you can also say the same thing about radio propping up artists because they're rigging the charts as well because they have too much towards the algorithm, towards the calculation, the methodology. The methodology should be more streaming than it is radio, than it is sales. Like, sales should still be secondary, but I think radio should be tertiary and much less of a factor than it ever has. That's just my opinion. Because radio is only going to limit the amount of songs that are going to be charting up because they're not going to go ahead and include all those songs together. Sales gives you a free open playing field of who's going to get the chart. And streaming does the same thing. Sales and streaming will include all songs a chance to play. Radio does not. So why did they get such a high cut into the mix? Now, it was worth noting that BTS has never relied on merch or ticket bundles to sell their music because they don't have to. They're capable of selling out stadiums all over the world while simultaneously netting number one hits and shattering sales and streaming records. It wasn't that way before. 8 years ago, the group started out with no stateside presence. The first several albums didn't even crack the Billboard 200, and once they started, the group enjoyed a long year's ascent before finally topping the chart with 2018's Love Yourself Tear. Now, you can't fabricate the otherworldly success, nor can you rush it. BTS has been methodically growing their audience for years, and now their fan base has the power to shoot their songs and albums to number one in America and abroad. That's how popularity works. You get more fans, you get better chart placement. And this is where the fact that BTS, for the last couple of years, had no radio support whatsoever. Now they do, because of what I said. If radio wants to be relevant again, they better go ahead and respond to that BTS army, start playing their songs. But they don't. They'll take a song when it's popular and put it up there because they know that people are going to listen to it. And there you go. But yeah, I will admit that Tom Brahan is right, because the number one song in the country, which will be number one probably next week when the new charts come out for the week ending June 11th, I'm going to guess that it will probably be Olivia Rodrigo's Good For You. That'll be back to number one, second non-consecutive week. But, and this is when I'm recording this, but I think there could be somebody else that comes in. We don't know who that could be. At this moment, I don't think there's any songs that are going to make their way to number one. I'm just guessing that song's going to make it back there. And that's without knowing what any predictions there are coming up, but I'm sure somebody will put that out there, and that the methodology will bring that back up, and then BTS's Butter will probably drop back off the chart a little bit. Probably what will happen. So as for streaming, companies like Spotify will likely never be fully transparent about their streaming filtration methods, which knocked the official first-day streams of Butter to roughly 11 million, down from the 20.9 million unfiltered streams it's garnered. Could have been the biggest single-day total in Spotify history. If we're talking about dubious sales tactics, let's not forget that prior to the introduction of Nielsen SoundScan in 1991, which was the electronic way of counting sales of records, Billboard tracked sales by calling record stores across the country, an honor system subjected to outright fraud by clerks with a vendetta against certain artists or a little financial incentive from record labels. If you want to argue the pop charts are useless, you've got to be willing to admit they've been for decades. Rather than chastising fans, for spending their money on music released by their favorite artists, which you might recall is how songs topped the charts in the olden days before streaming existed, maybe we should criticize the record labels reportedly spending tens of thousands of dollars on strong-arming radio stations and playing their music despite such pay-for-play practices being ostensibly outlawed. Yeah, payola still happens, and because Billboard allows radio to still be so important, that's why it's allowed to happen. But only for the largest labels, not for the independents and not for others, because not every song is going to get paid for played. That's not going to happen. Now, Brahan's assertion that Butter isn't exactly the most popular song in America doesn't simply not hold water. Just because a song doesn't fit your preconceived notions of what a hit sounds like or how it's achieved doesn't make it less legitimate. What I'm saying is, I still think Olivia Rodrigo's Good For You is still the most popular song in the country, but that doesn't mean that BTS's Butter probably wasn't in the argument or in the conversation or is not at least a top 3 or top 5 song. Like BTS Butter, it's a good song. It makes sense. And with the popularity of that group, I understand why that song made it so high. And it's justified they make it to number one. They have a record of doing it, and people listen to it. And people put their money where their mouth was. The BTS Army, if they're able to get that much of an audience to come in, stream, sell, and get the radio stations to play it, they earned a number one. Enough said. It's still much more accurate than it was before. And it's also much better than what the radio stations use with MediaBase, which is a piece of crap. Okay? Barring a seismic industry shift, the Hot 100 still determines the most popular songs in the country, flawed methodology and all. Somebody's got to determine what song takes a throne every week, be it fans, record label executives, or somebody else with deep pockets. To accuse BTS of ruining the pop charts in the process is ignoring decades of foul play surrounding the Billboard charts, as well as BTS's own stratospheric success, which took years to cultivate, which shows no signs of diminishing. That's it. Makes sense. But I don't take so much Tom Brahan's area about how BTS kind of took advantage of the charts. Payola is going to work some ways, and then if you're just doing something to incentivize the fans out there, yeah, they're just using the system as the way it can be played. They can manipulate it. That's understood. So Billboard should address this and realize, change your methodology a little bit. Now, I'm not saying to take sales out there, but they're still trying to figure out the sales category to make sure it's an even playing field. Still, sales is very important because anybody can go and sell a record all the way to the top. So that right there still matters, but there's just not that much going on like that. Streaming is where the play is. So let's get that more into that. Plus, if you need to go and go after Spotify, if they're filtering out streams, let's talk about that too. Let's make it an accurate representation of what's the most popular song in the country. That's what I'd like to have. Anyway, I'll leave it there, and I'll talk to you next time.